What happens when a power-hungry HOA Karen tries to extort $500,000 from a quiet couple only to discover the wife is actually a decorated military general? Let's just say the cops' reaction shocked everyone. If you loved watching HOA Karen finally get what she deserved, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and turn on the bell so you never miss another story where justice wins over tyranny. It started as just another sunny afternoon in the neighborhood, the kind of day where the air feels calm and time slows down. My wife and I were sitting on the porch, sipping our coffee, enjoying the faint sound of kids riding their bikes down the cul-de-sac. The roses in the front yard swayed in the breeze, and for a moment, life felt peaceful. But peace doesn't last long when you live under the iron grip of our HOA, especially when that HOA is led by the infamous Karen. We noticed it almost immediately, a crisp white envelope tucked neatly under our front door. At first we didn't think much of it. We'd gotten plenty of these friendly reminders before, letters about lawn height being an inch too tall, complaints about the wrong shade of beige on our shutters, even a notice once about leaving a garden hose visible from the street. So when my wife bent down to pick it up, we assumed it was just another one of those silly notices. She tore the envelope open casually, skimming the letter inside. But then her eyes widened, her lips parted as she whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." She held the paper up like it was burning her fingers. I leaned over, curious. In bold black letters, the words nearly leaped off the page. Special assessment fee, $500,000 due immediately, $500,000. For what? The letter explained it in Karen's typical, overblown, self-important tone, to improve community standards and secure future neighborhood prosperity, which, in plain English, meant funding Karen's latest obsession, her dream of building a massive ornamental fountain in the center of the cul-de-sac, complete with marble lions, gold-plated benches, and some kind of ridiculous light show. I couldn't help but laugh at the insanity of it, but my wife didn't laugh. She set the letter down on the porch table, folded her hands, and calmly shook her head. "This is ridiculous," she said firmly. "I'm not paying a cent." Anyone else might have panicked at the thought of being slapped with a demand like that. $500,000 is life-changing money. But my wife, she was steady, unshaken. That was one of the things I admired most about her. She didn't bow to pressure, and she certainly wasn't about to hand over our life savings for Karen's fountain fantasy. But here's the thing about HOA Karen. Reason never works. This was a woman who once fined a neighbor $200 because their dog barked for more than 3 minutes straight. A woman who drove around the neighborhood with a clipboard like a self-appointed queen inspecting her kingdom. A woman who believed the HOA gave her the power to rule over every household like a monarch. And when someone challenged her, she didn't just let it slide. She escalated. Sure enough, within hours of us ignoring the letter, Karen was marching up our driveway like she was storming a battlefield. She didn't even bother knocking, just stomped her way up the steps, her heels clacking against the wood, her trusty clipboard clutched under her arm like it was some kind of weapon. Her face was flushed red, beads of sweat forming at her temple. Despite the mild weather, you could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. She planted herself in front of us, hands on hips, nostrils flaring. "Did you get the notice?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet of the neighborhood. My wife didn't flinch. She calmly sipped her coffee, set the cup down, and said, "Yes, Karen, we got your letter. And no, we're not paying." The color in Karen's face deepened, her lips tightening into a thin line. "This is a community requirement," she snapped, waving her clipboard in the air like it was the Constitution itself. "If you don't comply, there will be consequences." "Consequences?" my wife asked, raising an eyebrow. Her tone was measured, but I could hear the steel beneath it. "Karen, you can't just demand $500,000 because you want to build a fountain. That's not how this works." But Karen wasn't listening. She never listened. Instead, she launched into a tirade about community obligations and preserving property values, throwing out legal-sounding words she clearly didn't understand. She paced back and forth on our porch, her pen tapping furiously against her clipboard, as if she was building a case right there in front of us. And the more she ranted, the clearer it became. This wasn't about the neighborhood, or property values, or even some fountain. This was about power. Karen lived for the rush of control, the thrill of making people bend to her will. And now that we'd said no, she wasn't about to let it go. My wife, however, was done entertaining her. She stood, her posture calm but commanding, and looked Karen square in the eye. "We're not paying, and if you think you can bully us into this, you're mistaken." For a moment, there was silence. Just the sound of birds chirping, the faint hum of a lawnmower down the street, and the weight of two women locked in a silent standoff. Karen's eye twitched. She tightened her grip on the clipboard, then jabbed her finger toward us. "Fine," she hissed. "If you won't pay, I'll make sure you regret it." And with that, she whipped out her phone, her fingers flying as she dialed. I didn't need to hear the full conversation to know what was happening. Karen was calling the cops. She turned away from us, her voice rising dramatically as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, officer, it's an emergency. My neighbors are refusing to comply with HOA law. They're becoming hostile. Her performance was so over the top it would have been funny, if it weren't for the fact that within minutes, we heard the distant wail of sirens drawing closer. My wife sighed and sat back down, shaking her head. "Here we go," she muttered, as Karen stood at the end of our driveway, practically bouncing with anticipation, ready to see us dragged off in handcuffs for refusing to fund her $500,000 fountain. And that was when everything shifted. Karen strutted around like she owned the entire neighborhood, her shoulders pulled back, chin raised as though she were some self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. The heels of her sandals clicked against the porch floor, sharp and deliberate, each step a challenge. She planted herself right in front of us, glaring, her arms crossed tightly around her clipboard like it was a royal decree. Then, with a sudden flourish, she jabbed her finger at my wife's face, the nail painted in a harsh shade of red that seemed to scream for attention, just as loudly as her voice did. "Community obligations," Karen barked, her words echoing across the quiet street. "That's what this is about. Everyone must contribute, and you two are no exception. If you refuse, I will file liens against your property. You'll be buried in lawsuits before you even know what's happening. And if that doesn't work, I'll have you evicted. Nobody, and I mean nobody, defies me and the HOA." Her words poured out in a furious stream, each threat more outrageous than the last. I could see the veins pulsing on her neck, her face flushed with self-righteous anger. But my wife stood tall and unflinching. She didn't even blink. She simply folded her arms, squared her shoulders, and stared back at Karen with a calm intensity that could slice through steel. "We're not paying $500,000 for your personal fountain project." "Karen, my wife," said her voice firm, steady, and completely void of fear, "you've lost your mind." For a moment there was silence. Karen's nostrils flared, her lips twitched, and then suddenly she smirked. That smirk, the kind of grin that lets you know someone has just thought of their next move and believes it's checkmate. She tilted her head ever so slightly, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Fine," she hissed, reaching into her oversized handbag. "If you won't pay, then I'll get the police to enforce it." She yanked out her phone like it was a weapon. My wife and I exchanged glances, more amused than worried, but Karen was dead serious. Her thumb flew across the screen, and within seconds she had 911 on the line. Now, anyone watching this scene unfold might have thought Karen was reporting a violent crime. Her voice trembled with exaggerated fear as she dramatically clutched her chest with her free hand, pacing across the porch like a stage actress in a tragedy. "Yes, hello," she exclaimed, her tone shaking. "I need the police immediately. My neighbors are hostile. They're refusing to comply with HOA law. They're aggressive, and I feel threatened in my own community." I almost laughed out loud. HOA law, hostile residents. Aggressive. My wife was sitting there calmly, sipping her coffee, while Karen put on a Broadway-level performance for an audience of one. The emergency dispatcher. I couldn't help but notice how she turned her body slightly, making sure her voice projected loud enough for the neighbors. Curtains twitched from houses nearby. A couple across the street peeked out, whispering. Karen wasn't just calling the police. She was putting on a show for the entire neighborhood, trying to humiliate us and rally sympathy for herself. My wife leaned back against the porch railing. She muttered under her breath, "If she keeps this up, maybe she'll win an Oscar." Karen, meanwhile, was pacing with increasing urgency, her voice cracking as she layered on more drama. "Yes, officer, they're dangerous. They're refusing to follow the rules. I'm just trying to protect the community, and they're attacking me with hostility." Attacking her. The closest thing to an attack had been my wife's calm refusal to sign away $500,000 for Karen's fountain dream. But facts didn't matter to Karen. What mattered was control. And in her mind, calling the cops was the ultimate power move, the nuclear option to put us in our place. And that's when we heard it, the faint, distant sound of sirens. At first it was just a low wail in the background, blending with the breeze and the hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, but it grew louder, sharper, cutting through the peaceful suburban atmosphere like a blade. Karen's eyes lit up, her smirk returning in full force. She ended her call with a triumphant, "Yes, please hurry," and stuffed her phone back into her bag, spinning toward us with a look of smug victory. "They're coming," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "And when they get here, you'll learn that nobody defies the HOA." The sound of the sirens grew louder, closer. A few more neighbors stepped out onto their porches, drawn by the noise, murmuring amongst themselves as they watched the drama unfold. Karen stood at the edge of our driveway now, straightening her blouse, fixing her hair, and holding her clipboard like she was preparing for a press conference. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "She actually thinks the cops are going to arrest us over this." My wife gave a small shrug, her expression calm, almost bored. "Let her play her game. We'll see how it ends." And then, with a sharp screech of tires, the patrol car turned onto our street. Red and blue lights flashed against the houses, sirens blaring until the officer flicked them off and rolled to a stop right in front of our home. Karen's smirk widened. She waved her arms wildly, almost skipping toward the car, as though she had summoned it with her sheer willpower. "Officer, officer, over here," she shouted, her voice loud enough to echo. The officer stepped out, tall and calm, his sunglasses reflecting the chaos in front of him. Karen launched into her story before he even had a chance to shut the door, gesturing dramatically toward us, painting us as the villains of the neighborhood. "They're refusing to comply with the HOA," she cried. "They're hostile. They owe $500,000 and are threatening community peace. You have to arrest them." I almost lost it then. Arrest us for not paying into her fountain fund. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if it weren't so real. But little did Karen know, this was the moment her entire scheme would collapse. Because the officer didn't react the way she thought he would. He didn't nod along or rush to put us in handcuffs. Instead, he turned to us with a curious expression, studying us carefully, and everything about his posture shifted. The real show was about to begin. A patrol car pulled up in front of our house, lights flashing like a carnival of red and blue against the beige walls of the neighborhood. The sirens died with a sharp wail, but the atmosphere they left behind was electric. Curtains twitched in nearly every house on the block. Doors creaked open as neighbors peeked out, eager for the next chapter in what had quickly turned into the day's headline drama. And then there was Karen. The moment the car stopped, she rushed forward like a traffic marshal on a runway, waving her arms frantically as though the officer might miss her otherwise. Her voice pierced through the calm, like nails on a chalkboard. "Officer, officer, over here. Arrest them," she shouted, practically hopping in place with anticipation. The car door opened slowly, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered officer. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He adjusted his belt, glanced briefly around the neighborhood, then focused on the scene in front of him. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of skepticism in his eyes as he took in the sight of Karen, red-faced, hair frizzed from her sprint, waving a clipboard like it was Exhibit A in a trial. "They're refusing to pay the HOA fine," Karen shrieked, pointing at us like she'd just uncovered a pair of jewel thieves. The officer tilted his head, giving her a slow once-over, then glanced at us. His gaze lingered, steady, almost assessing. My wife, standing on the porch with her arms crossed, looked utterly calm. She didn't flinch under his stare, didn't shrink away. Instead, she gave the officer a level look, then asked, dryly, "You want him to arrest us for not paying your fantasy fountain fund?" A ripple of chuckles spread through the small crowd of neighbors now gathered at the edges of their lawns. Karen's face went scarlet, and she puffed up like an angry rooster. "It's the law of the HOA," she barked. "They owe $500,000, and they're endangering the community by refusing to pay." The officer raised one eyebrow. His expression didn't change much, but the skepticism deepened, as though he were trying to decide if this was some kind of prank call gone too far. Slowly, he turned toward us. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice measured and professional. My wife didn't miss a beat. Without a word, she reached for the ridiculous letter still sitting on the porch table. She handed it to him with a calm precision, her eyes never leaving his face. He took it, unfolded it, and began to read. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of an air conditioner and the occasional bark of a dog 2 streets over. The officer's eyes scanned the letter once. His brows furrowed. He read it again, slower this time, lips pressing into a thin line. Then he folded the paper back up carefully, as though considering the weight of what he had just read. When he finally looked up, his entire demeanor shifted. His face grew serious, his jaw set, and then suddenly his posture transformed. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared, and his heels clicked together sharply. To my shock, he snapped to attention. The motion was crisp, military grade, the kind you only see in parades or ceremonies. And then, in a voice that rang with sharp authority, he barked out, "Yes, General." The neighborhood froze. Karen's jaw dropped so far she could have swallowed a golf ball. The crowd that had been whispering now fell completely silent, their eyes darting from the officer to my wife in utter disbelief. My wife, calm as ever, gave a small nod. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't say a word. But her composure told everyone what the officer had just confirmed. This wasn't just some ordinary homeowner. The officer saluted again. "Precise and unwavering, ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough for Karen and every neighbor to hear. I didn't realize I was in the presence of a decorated officer. "Please forgive the intrusion," Karen sputtered, flailing her arms as though trying to grab invisible strings of controls slipping from her hands. "Gee, General, what? She's just a housewife. She can't be. This is insane. Arrest her. Arrest them both." But the officer didn't even look at her. His eyes remained on my wife, his respect clear in every word, every gesture. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Karen, who had strutted around seconds earlier like she ruled the block, now looked small, ridiculous, and powerless. Neighbors whispered among themselves, the word general bouncing from one yard to another. Some took out their phones, recording the surreal sight of an officer saluting a woman they'd all known simply as the quiet lady on the corner. Karen's voice cracked as she tried one last time. "This is madness. She's lying. She's manipulating you." But the officer finally turned to her, his jaw tight, his tone icy. "Ma'am, you are dangerously close to committing a crime by filing a false emergency report. If you don't stand down immediately, I will be forced to detain you." The color drained from Karen's face. She clutched her clipboard like a shield, her eyes darting around at the crowd that was now openly snickering. Her empire, her authority, her reign of fear was all crumbling before her eyes. Meanwhile, my wife stood serene, the picture of composure. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't even broken a sweat. And yet, with nothing more than the truth of who she was, she had turned the entire game upside down. The officer, still standing at attention, awaited her command. And for the first time in years, Karen had no words, no power, and no escape. The officer's words cut through the air like a thunderclap. Yes, General. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My jaw dropped, my brain scrambling to process what he had just said. Around us, the neighborhood fell into a stunned silence. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone collectively realizes they're witnessing something extraordinary. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-song, as though nature itself was waiting for what would happen next. Karen froze. Her finger, which had been jabbing furiously in my wife's direction just seconds earlier, now hung limp in the air. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Like a glitching character in a video game, she blinked once, twice, 3 times, as if that would somehow reset the reality in front of her. Meanwhile, the officer snapped his salute again, sharp and precise, the kind of motion that carried the weight of discipline and respect drilled into him through years of service. His voice softened but carried just as much authority. "Ma'am," he said, his tone reverent, "I didn't realize I was in the presence of a decorated officer. I apologize for the intrusion. It's an honor." And that's when the truth spilled into the open, the truth my wife never flaunted, never brought up in casual conversation, and certainly never used to her advantage. She was a retired military general, a woman who had led soldiers, made impossible decisions in impossible moments, and earned medals that now sat quietly in a box tucked away in our home office. She never bragged, never boasted. To the neighbors, she was just the quiet, steady woman who watered her roses every morning, and waved politely when walking the dog. But the officer knew her name. The recognition was instant. His entire demeanor had shifted the second he read that letter and saw her signature. In that moment, he wasn't looking at just a homeowner. He was looking at a leader who had commanded respect on battlefields. Most people could only imagine. Karen, however, couldn't wrap her head around it. Her eyes darted between the officer and my wife, her face contorting into a mixture of disbelief and outrage. General, she stammered, her voice shrill and breaking. "She's just a housewife. She can't be. No. This is some kind of mistake." But her protests only made her look smaller, more desperate. Neighbors shifted on their lawns, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. "A general?" one man muttered, his phone already recording. I knew she was tough, but wow. Another voice piped up. Karen messed with the wrong family this time. The crowd was turning, the tide of opinion rolling away from Karen, faster than she could spin it back in her favor. The officer's expression hardened as he finally turned to face Karen. His eyes, hidden partly behind his sunglasses, were cold, unyielding. His voice was no longer polite but clipped and professional, each word like a hammer striking steel. "Ma'am, filing false police reports is a crime. Wasting emergency resources is a crime. And harassing a decorated veteran over fabricated fees." He let the pause hang in the air, heavy and damning. "That's not just wrong, that's a federal issue." Karen's face drained of color. She looked like she might faint right there on the driveway. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her sweaty grip, papers crumpling as her fingers trembled. Her mouth opened again, but this time only a pitiful squeak escaped. For the first time in all the years we'd dealt with her, Karen, the self-proclaimed Queen of the HOA, had no words. The officer took a step closer, towering over her, his presence radiating authority. "Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Karen shook her head violently, as if denial could somehow erase the moment. No, I didn't know. I thought, she trailed off, her usual arsenal of legal jargon and HOA buzzwords failing her completely. "You thought wrong?" the officer snapped. "You abused the system for your personal vendetta. You put lives at risk by tying up emergency services with your nonsense. And you disrespected a woman who has given more for this country than you will ever understand." Gasps rippled through the crowd of neighbors. Phones were up everywhere now, recording every word, every flinch of Karen's crumbling composure. This was no longer just a neighborhood spat. This was a public unraveling. I glanced at my wife, who remained calm, her arms loosely crossed, her gaze steady. She didn't smile, didn't smirk, didn't bask in the reveal. She stood there the same way she always had, grounded, unshaken, unbothered by Karen's theatrics. That quiet strength, now everyone could see where it came from. Karen stumbled backward a step, shaking her head, her words tumbling out in a weak, pathetic stream. I didn't realize who she was. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." The officer didn't flinch. "Protect the neighborhood? By demanding $500,000 for your personal fountain project. Don't insult my intelligence, ma'am, or hers." Karen's lip quivered. She looked around desperately, hoping the neighbors might side with her, might rescue her reputation. But all she saw were eyes filled with scorn, amusement, and satisfaction. The empire she had built on intimidation and empty threats was collapsing around her, and there was nothing left for her to stand on. For the first time, she looked small, the towering tyrant of HOA rules, but a fragile, trembling woman who had finally run into a wall she couldn't climb over. Her silence said everything. She had lost, and my wife? She hadn't lifted a finger. From that moment, the dynamic shifted completely. The air itself seemed different, heavier, charged with the weight of justice finally catching up to years of petty tyranny. The officer no longer even glanced at us as suspects. He stood firmly at my wife's side, his posture straight and protective, as though he were guarding a superior officer on duty. My wife remained calm, her presence steady as a stone. While Karen's once fierce confidence crumbled right there in the middle of our driveway, Karen stumbled over her words, flailing for excuses that weren't landing. I was only thinking of the community, she stuttered, her voice wobbling. It was for improvements, for beautification projects, for the greater good. Her hands shook as she tried to fan through the papers on her clipboard, pointing to bullet points that only made her rambling sound more desperate. But the officer wasn't buying it. He had shifted into full professional mode, his voice firm, clipped, the kind of tone that left no room for negotiation. Slowly, he pulled out his notepad, flipping it open with a deliberate motion. The scratching of his pen echoed in the silence. As he began writing, "Ma'am," he said without looking up, "you'll be facing charges for harassment, attempted fraud, and misuse of emergency services." He paused, his eyes cutting sharply toward her. "You understand those are criminal offenses, don't you?" Karen's face went ghost white. Her lips trembled, but no words came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "Criminal offenses," as though the phrase itself were foreign to her. "Yes, ma'am." The officer's tone carried the weight of a hammer striking an anvil. "You wasted emergency resources for a fabricated crisis, attempted to extort your neighbors for personal gain, and abused your position of authority in this community. That will not go unpunished." Karen's eyes darted wildly between us, the officer, and the growing crowd of neighbors who had all but abandoned their living rooms to watch the spectacle unfold. Curtains no longer merely twitched, windows were thrown open, phones were held high, and whispers surged like waves. "Is she actually getting arrested?" one neighbor murmured. "About time?" another muttered. Someone else chuckled. $500,000 for a fountain. She's lost it completely. The HOA's reign of terror, built on threats, fines, and endless pettiness, had finally met its match, and everyone knew it. Karen tried one last gasp at control. You can't do this. I'm the head of the she shrieked, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. "You'll regret this. The board will hear about this." But the officer simply stepped forward and, with a calm finality, took the clipboard from her trembling hands. He closed it shut, and handed it to another officer who had just arrived for backup. "Not anymore, ma'am," he said. The sound of handcuffs clicking open silenced the murmurs of the crowd. Karen's eyes widened in panic. "No, this is a mistake. You can't handcuff me. I'm not a criminal, I'm a protector. I was defending property values." She flailed weakly, but her resistance looked pitiful compared to the iron grip of the officer as he turned her around and secured her wrists behind her back. Neighbors gasped, some audibly cheering under their breath. Phones recorded every second, ensuring that this moment of downfall would live online forever. Karen, who once threatened to find children for chalk drawings on the sidewalk, was now being escorted down the driveway in handcuffs. I turned to my wife, who stood with her arms crossed, calm as ever. She gave me the faintest smile, one of those knowing smiles she reserved for when a battle was over and victory was undeniable. "Guess that's one fee we'll never have to pay," she said softly. That broke the tension. A ripple of laughter spread through the onlookers. Some clapped quietly, others exchanged high-fives, and a few shouted words of encouragement. Finally, one neighbor yelled, "Justice." Another added, "The witch is gone." As Karen was placed in the back of the patrol car, she looked out the window with wide, frantic eyes, searching desperately for anyone to defend her. But the neighborhood she had tormented for years now watched her downfall with relief, and even joy. Not a single person stepped forward to take her side. Her power trip was officially over. The officer closed the car door with a decisive slam, sealing Karen's fate. The patrol car pulled away slowly, its lights flashing faintly. As it disappeared down the street, and with it, so too disappeared, the shadow Karen had cast over the neighborhood for so long. That night, the atmosphere was different. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer, for the first time in years. People gathered in driveways and front yards, without fear of being scolded for the angle of their lawn chairs or the length of their hedges. Kids rode their bikes past curfew, chalk drawings bloomed on the sidewalks, and laughter carried into the night. Word spread quickly. The HOA as it had been known was finished. Karen's board crumbled without its queen, and no one stepped forward to resurrect it. By morning, the fountain project was already a punchline. A story neighbors told with chuckles about the time Karen tried to charge $500,000 for a water show. And my wife. She went back to her normal life, quiet, steady, never boasting about what had happened. But everyone knew now. They knew the truth of who she was, the strength she carried, and the reason she never let Karen's bullying shake her. She wasn't just another neighbor. She was a leader, a fighter, someone who had faced far greater battles than a power-hungry HOA president. As for me, I'll never forget that moment the officer at attention, the word general hanging in the air, Karen's face draining of color as the walls of her false kingdom came crashing down. It was the day the neighborhood was set free, and it all started with an outrageous $500,000 fee.